Hi everyone, my name's Les Greenhalgh. You're watching Into the Vertical Blank.
Into the vertical blank, generation Atari. Into the vertical blank.
The Atari STe is the forgotten 16-bit platform. Released in late 1989, the 520 STe was a step up from the original Atari ST, about 95% compatible, but with enhanced capabilities that closely matched but did not exceed the Amiga 500. Even though the ST had been quite popular, and probably because of the installed base of non-STe users, most developers ignored the STe in favor of the plain old ST, relegating it and the STs to afterthought status and a dwindling game library as the 90s went on. This part of history is the second big part of the vertical blank. The first being the fall of Atari in 1984, when Steve and I suddenly lost the dream of ever being able to work for and make games for Atari. What would have happened in the 90s if game developers put as much effort into STe versions of software as they did with Amiga 500 versions? We have a few great examples such as Obsession Pinball and Stardust, but those are few and far between. Over the last 35 years, a small dedicated group of various ST hardcore developers have produced some amazing STe titles, and have also produced the ST Game Tools development system. But the Amiga and Genesis Mega Drive routinely receive new titles, while the STe sits in the corner waiting for its chance to dance. The Scorpion engine for the Amiga and Genesis Mega Drive is one huge reason why. It's a brilliant, easy-to-use game development system that a good programmer can use to create very nice games for those systems. The STe does not have such a toolset. I've looked at the ST Game Tools dev system, and so far it's too complex for me to get my head around. It might be far too complex for most hobby game developers. I might be wrong, and will give it a chance sometime, but I have yet to even get a good dev system build that can compile the demo code. Yes, this is on me, but I don't have much time these days, and if I want to make an STe game, I need an easier system to use. My two choices are STOS along with the various STe extensions, and GFA Basic with the toolset like SpriteWorks 2. Up to this point, I've been unsuccessful in producing anything worthwhile with either system. A few years back, I did a lot of code and graphics for a Scramble clone for the ST, using the STOS Missing Link extensions. Here is a demo of that running. It uses both pre-shifted background tiles and pre-shifted foreground sprites. It runs at a decent frame rate. But after years of playing and making videos on ST games, I have seen horizontal scrolling games that already perform like this. There's no way that pre-shifting alone will make a 30 FPS plus game on the STe. For the uninitiated, the ST and STe have no sprites. The memory map for its graphics is very similar to the Commodore 64, but with static 16x16 blocks instead of 8x8 blocks. Unlike the Commodore 64, all 16 current palette colors from 512 on the ST and 4096 on the STe can be used in any block. The 16 color palette can also be changed every scan line, but this takes processor, so usually the 16 color palette was changed only 1 or 2 times per screen at most. Because of this, when you want to display a moving object that bridges the 16 pixel boundary horizontally, a lot of processing is needed to shift all of the bits needed to change the memory locations of the graphics. To compensate for this, a process known as pre-shifting was used to hold in memory the sprites in positions that cross horizontal boundaries. This takes extra RAM, but makes smooth games possible. The exact same idea was also employed with background tiles to make smooth horizontal scrolling possible without hardware assistance. the STe changed all of this. It didn't change the memory map, but it did allow for fast shifting background graphics with its hardware scrolling and foreground graphics with its hardware blitter chip. Sound on the ST was always a little dire, although there are many developers who wrote incredible drivers and made great use of its capabilities. Bubble Bobble and Turrican 2 come to mind. For a hobbyist developer like myself, the STe adds a stereo DMA sound chip with the ability to play mod files while games are playing. It also has a mixer that combines the DMA sound with the ST sound channels for extra sound effects, music, or mono samples. With STOS, it's pretty easy to use the STe sound, but the caveat is that the interrupts needed to play mod files and mix sound interfere with the blitter chip, making it necessary to do very complicated low-level code to get around it. Needless to say, I'm looking for a set of tools that doesn't require hardcore low-level coding to accomplish what I need. So given all of this, can I find a system of pieces and parts, create a few demo games, and publish documentation that will help both me and others target the STe with more games? The first system I want to try to do this with is STOS, along with the associated extensions. While Missing Link is not compatible with the STe, the control extension by Les Greenhalgh is. Les created this extension in the 90s, and while it's been available for hobbyists to use for a while now, the final version was not. But this has been found. It's now available, and among other little tools it contains, it can be used to do hardware scrolling and play Ninja Tracker mod files. Les has been developing games lately for the Soectrum Next, and he was happy to discuss the ST and his extension with me.
Yeah, sure. So my first computer was actually a Sinclair ZX Spectrum, I think in about 1984. They had, I'm sure you've seen one, but they had basically they're famous for basically having a rubber keyboard, effectively, yeah. That's their kind of claim to fame. And I had that for about 3 years and taught myself basic programming on that. And then I think in 1987, I think the Atari STe had been released into the UK, and I was lucky enough to get a 1040 STFM for I think the Christmas of I think 1987. And then obviously STOS was released a year after that, I think in '98, and I pretty much bought that immediately. Was kind of programming STOS, I think from pretty much the first day of its release into the UK, I think. Yeah. So I did wrote a couple of games called Biohazard 1 and 2 in STOS. Actually, one of those got an ST format. I think, can't remember what it's called, a Smash, whatever it's called when they did games that got over 90%. So I got a good score for one of those. Then I wrote a couple of extensions for STOS. One was called the Ninja Tracker, which is pretty much the kind of default tracker extension for STOS. And then a while after that, I wrote a extension called the Control extension. So obviously the Missing Link is probably the most well-known STOS extension. That kind of massively improved STOS's ability to basically write maps and what we call bobs to the screen. It was far ahead of STOS's own inbuilt sprite support, but the issue with it, though it was incredibly fast, in order to support games run on the STe, it only supported the ST's default lower resolution of 320 x 200. But if you're going to write STe games, basically you've got to be able to support a viewport that's not the default 320 by 200. So basically the control extension, its main purpose was to basically be able to write, images and map tiles and things to a resolution that wasn't necessarily 320 by 200. Could basically be anything you liked. And once that was in place, we basically gave STOS the ability to write smooth scrolling horizontal shooters for the first time in STOS. Yeah. Had things like also the Jag pad support as well, so you could plug in the Jaguar controllers that the STe supported. So its main reason was to do Missing Link type functionality, but expand it to the STe basically as well.
The 3.6 version of Les's control extension had been missing for over 30 years. On the Facebook group STOS Coders, Les was repeatedly asked, especially by annoying people like me, if he has the final version. Up until just a few weeks ago, Les was empty-handed because he'd put those memories and discs away, like many of us.
Not sure if you know someone called Neil Halliday, yeah?
Yes.
But basically, so he deserves the kudos. He managed to rescue the files for me, yeah? Essentially, my father passed away last year, and I was basically going through his things a few weeks ago, and I knew somewhere I had a box of my old floppy disks from the 80s somewhere in his belongings, and I've luckily managed to find a box of floppy disks, and some of those were obviously STOS related things. Wow. Yeah. So I contacted Neil Halliday because obviously, like most people, none of the IT equipment I've got now is able to read those 3.25, 3.5 inch discs from the 80s. So I contacted Neil, and I said, have you got anything that could read these? I think I can't remember if the device is called a grease weasel or a grease monkey, but it's basically a device that allows a PC to read with a specially adapted floppy drive to basically read SD formatted disks from the 80s. Yeah. So I sent a number of disks to Neil. I said, I think we've got some really interesting stuff here. Yeah. If you can get this stuff off the disks, then obviously we'll release it to the community. Actually, it was successful in about three quarters of the disks I sent him, which was great, really. So.
Included with Les's extension, he created various demos and games to help people understand exactly what it was capable of, along with a map creation tool and a tool to convert STOS sprites into the image format his extension uses for pre-shifting. Les's map tool is particularly well done and is light years ahead of most other tools I've used on the ST. The 3 games he created are very well crafted, but he doesn't even seem to remember creating them at all. That vertical blank.
Interestingly, so I'd completely forgotten I'd written these until about 2 weeks ago when I was going through the files on the disk, and it's like, it must have been me, but I've got no recollection of writing these. But I was surprised actually how good the Space Invaders one was.
They're good. One of the things that's missing from the set of games Les created is an actual STe horizontal scroller. That's where I come in. So,
well, you should be able to get pretty close to native assembly for it. But yeah, I think it probably does need a proper example of an STe horizontal scroll with sprites example.
The big question I've always had with STe hardware scrolling is how to set up the necessary horizontal tile-based screen, what width to use, and how many temp screens are needed.
Yes, exactly that. Yeah. So I think what you'd need. I mean, again, it's a long time ago now, but I think what you'd need to define is, and let's say start with horizontal shooter first. Yeah, is you'd need to define a number of banks which are slightly wider than the normal. Let's say, I don't know, 336 by 320, something like that. Yeah. And so essentially you have your logic and physics like you do normally with stuff, yeah. But essentially what you're doing is, let's say you're kind of, you say you're basically showing a screen, but then in the background you're kind of drawing the next column in the background, yeah. Yeah. So I think basically you need 4 screens, each of which are the same size, 16 pixels wider than the normal STOS screen, 16 pixels wider than the normal STs, because you're going to be scrolling, yeah. So I think let's call them logic, physics, temp 1 and temp 2, yeah. So I think in temp 1 to start with, you draw an entire screen, yeah, but like one column wider in terms of tiles than your normal screen. So basically you filled up a complete 336 by 200 screen, yeah.
I've always wanted to use the blitter in combination with hardware scrolling and the DMA sound channels, like the Amiga can. But when looking at SpriteWorks 2 for GFA Basic, the developer in his documentation said that the best thing about the STe was the hardware scrolling. He added that the blitter, while a good little device, needs to be used in hog mode, and that interferes with DMA processes such as playing Ninja samples or using the DMA sound processor. Les agrees.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So I think the fastest will be with the blitter, but presumably you're going to want to be playing music or samples at the same time, yeah? So your challenge with the blitter is going to be that you only get that speed advantage if you can tell the blitter to hog the processor.
One thing we'd want to normally use the blitter for is copying 336 by 200 horizontal pixels to an off-screen memory location as fast as possible. Then we would use the STE's horizontal scrolling to scroll the viewport to the correct location on the last tile. Finally, we would copy this to the logical screen to be swapped with the physical screen on the vertical blank. This takes time, and the blitter would be a fast way to tackle it. But Les has solved this problem without the blitter.
Yes, that's right. Because what the other main part of the extension is that it's able to do screen copies, again, of screens that are non-traditional width and height, yeah? So you can say, right, so I want you to, so let's say in temp 1 we've got basically a full screen drawn, but like one column wider than the normal estimate. You're right. I want you to take, copy this entire screen onto, let's say, the logic, yeah? Yeah, and then use the ST scroll commands to offset it between 0 to 15 to get that lovely smooth. Yeah, to get that lovely smooth, necessarily single pixel scrolling. Yeah,
Exactly.
and you should be able to copy that screen pretty much 50 times a second almost. Yeah, because you're not doing anything. You're not having to shift anything. Yeah, it's just literally take this 32K plus whatever another column is, and just basically blast it onto your logic. Yeah.
An interesting advancement over any scrolling engine I've ever created is Les's idea that you need a fourth screen which will have the next set of screen tiles ready with a new tile column in the 320 to 335 position. It can be created during the 16 frames the current screen and tiles are being animated to the output. This is one thing I will need to get my head around during the coming weeks.
Now, the other thing you need to do in the meantime is, so that'll give the ability to scroll basically 0 to 15 pixels, yeah, left to right. But obviously you've got to prepare for the time that you've gone 15 pixels forward, yeah, and then basically you need to basically start again because you need to have the next column and the next column. So I think as well as copying that entire screen across, I think you need to be preparing another version of the screen that's going to be ready once you scrolled 15 pixels to the right, if you know what I mean, yeah? So, but I think you've got, let's say you're doing single pixel scrolling, then you basically got 16 cycles to basically get an entire next screen drawn, and then you kind of flip between the two, yeah? Yeah, exactly. And then obviously you've got to spend the effort drawing your spaceships and your bullets and everything else. But the great thing about that is you're not having to shift any of the tiles. You don't actually even need the shifted version of the tiles because you're using the hardware scroll to basically. So obviously that's the big difference between the missing link. If you want to do something similar, you have to store the pre-shifted tile version to draw the map. This you don't because you're relying on the hardware scroll to do that for you. Also, the downside I said is maybe we need like more kind of screen copies than we would normally.
Okay, I'm starting to get my head around this now. We need the extra screens to set up scrolling. Then I can use Les's image command to put sprites on the screen because it understands a 336 pixel wide screen. Yeah.
So, but you are going to have to pre-shift the sprites because obviously they're moving independently of the hardware scroll. So you are going to have to Yeah. So, but again, the image is the right one to use, and the Space Invader and the Centipede one all have examples of that. So, yeah, you absolutely do. You are going to need to pre-shift your spaceship and your bullets and everything else. Yeah.
So, to get a mod file playing while doing all this graphics work, I can use Les's Ninja Tracker extension.
Yeah. So, if you want to use Ninja Tracker at the same time, it would be absolutely fine. Yeah. I think the challenge might come, I think, in sound effects. Without trying to remember stuff I've forgotten, I'm not sure what the right thing to do sound effects at the same time is going to be. I seem to remember the STE extension had like sample playing stuff in there, yeah.
Asia Burroughs created a STOS STe extension in the 90s, which Les confirms we can still use as a sample mixer for the JAGPad, etc. We just can't use the scrolling in that extension because it's buggy.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, because we know it's bugged, basically, yeah.
Okay.
But there's an issue when you go from, I think it's 15 pixels, basically it jerks. There's some pixel value that basically it jerks, which is again why people wanted it redone.
Right.
But there's definitely some investigation to be done around can we use Control Ninja Tracker and some kind of STE-based sample playing all at the same time, yeah?
It turns out we can also use the missing link extension, aside from its graphics commands, to do things like sample playing along with the Ninja Tracker to combine sounds and music at the same time.
Yes, I don't see any reason why not, because behind the scenes, Control isn't doing anything with interrupts. The only challenges you might have are when you try to use a blitter at the same time. It's absolutely worth a try. Yeah, I absolutely think a decent STE horizontal scrolling game is something that's doable. So we should absolutely try and get your Scramble game ported over to it. I'm very rusty. I've not really done any stuff for like 30 years. I'm rusty, but I'm absolutely interested in solving some of these problems with you. Yeah.
Oh boy, looks like I'm pronouncing Les's name wrong this whole time. It's Greenhalgh, not Greenlaw.
Greenhalgh. You basically ignore the GH on the end, basically.
Lately, Les has been working on games for the Soectrum Next, an updated Spectrum with more graphics and sound capabilities.
But in terms of home stuff, not sure if you know, but a few years ago, there basically obviously in the UK there was a product called the Sinclair ZX Spectrum that was a big computer. Yeah, so a few years ago, basically somebody developed a new version of it called the ZX Spectrum Next. Yeah. And I'm very active in that community. There is a version of BASIC called Boreal for it, which again it's a cross compiled thing. You run the BC, but it's very, very, very similar to STOS. So obviously this computer's got 256 color graphics, hardware scrolling, hardware samples. Although it's an 8-bit processor, it runs at 28 hertz. So it's pretty comparable to an ST in terms of actually there are some things you can do you couldn't do with an ST, like 256 color screens and stuff. But
it turns out that Les's extension also includes PAL splitting commands, so we can add more than 16 colors to the STE's screen.
I've got a feeling there's a PAL split, either example or command in the extension itself.
Okay.
But again, how it works with all the interrupts, all this stuff's very sensitive to what's going on interrupt-wise. So I've developed 2 games for the Spectrum Next so far. One of them again just got a Crash Smash award a couple of months ago.
Les's Spectrum Next games are stunning. Xeno Brigade is a tile-based strategy game that looks like it could be an STE game made with these tools.
Yeah. So again, like I said, that's got a very active and enthusiastic retro scene in the UK at the moment. It's I went to there's we'll call it a Crash Live, basically a Sinclair computer get together in November. There's like 600 people there, basically completely filled this entire hotel. But exactly, it's got a really big because obviously there's been attempts to remake things like the Commodore 64 and everything else, but they've been like $1,000 each or something. This is quite expensive still, but still it's had like the original design of the Sinclair Spectrum did the design for the case and stuff. So it's a really authentic what this computer could have been had it continued down its natural evolution rather than
It seems that the Spectrum Next really taps into the potential of Sinclair Spectrum owners' vertical blank. And now I really want to tap in to STE owners' vertical blank.
Absolutely, but it's a shame that the STE didn't do as well as it could have done, because there's clearly untapped potential there that was same with the Falcon. Clearly untapped potential there that was we never got to see, basically, because it wasn't the level of. Have you seen that racing game that came out for the
Of course, I've
STe
seen
in the
them. I've
last?
seen them.
Yeah.
Les was referring to Faster, a 2024 release by Jonathan Thomas, creating a 60 FPS racing game on the Atari STe. Jonathan is now working on an upgraded Amiga version. Jonathan's incredible achievement aside, Les and I agree on ST and Amiga conversions from back in the day.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem was because it's so easy to port stuff from the ST to Amiga. Obviously the Spectrum and the comms is completely different, so you couldn't port one to the other. So therefore,
Right.
you may as well have done your best effort on the Spectrum because you couldn't port it anyway. But with the ST, it's like you could do a really slapdash ST version and then port it to Amiga and make it better. So that's kind of what happened, I think.
So I want to combine pre-existing tools with my documentation, samples, and games to allow ST developers to make more games. The first step is to go back and make the Scramble engine work properly. Hopefully, this is just the first part of many. I want to thank Les for coming on and agreeing to help in any way he can.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I just have to dig out the brain cells from that era. Yeah, not many left.
This could be the start of a new era of STe game development. But even if I just finish one game, I hope it will be an inspiration and wake-up call to other STe developers and even just retro game developers in general to start making games for the system. So, will this work? Can I combine STOS with extensions and Neil Halliday's Vscode STOS plugin to make a simple modern STe game development system? Stay tuned to find out.
We were children of the Silicon Revolution, an X generation conscripted to fight the console and home computer wars. A product of an analog 70s childhood, we came of digital age in the 80s, believing we could affect the world 8 bits at a time. Armed with joysticks, full-stroke keyboards, Jolt Cola, and MTV haircuts, we proceeded into the vertical blank. There, we stayed up late at night, devising incantations from D&D rulebooks and beginners' all-purpose symbolic instruction code. Video games were the match, and programming was the fuse, as the infinite possibilities of the digital world exploded into the internet age to come. We are Generation Atari.
Into the vertical blank.